It's officially gardening season. The warm season has arrived, which means that it's time to get a whole bunch of things planted. So if you're unsure what you can be planting right now, I'm going to break down today everything that you can be planting in May and June during the warm growing season. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the warm growing season is and what that means for you in your particular area and how you can be planting to maximize your harvest. We'll cover both plants that you can sow directly in your garden and ones that you can start inside or should be starting already and then transplanting out into the garden. So let's dive in and break it down. Thanks for tuning in again. I'm Kaylee, and today we're going to dive into it. It's May and June, and those are the biggest planting months of the year, without a doubt, for most gardeners, pretty much in every area across North America. We previously had talked about what to plant in March and April, and in that video, we talked a little bit more about what the cool season is in terms of gardening, and the benefits of really planting seasonally. So I'll put that up above in case you want to check it out. But basically, by growing with the seasons and by letting the seasons guide what you're planting and growing, it gives you a lot more flexibility. Along with that, we have to bring up the discussion of USDA growing zones and frost dates. Now, these are super important if you're going to be successful with your garden. So let's talk about the difference just real quick. So with your USDA growing zone, every region is kind of assigned a growing zone. What I see a lot of gardeners do is base their planting dates off of their growing zones. But these growing zones are actually meant to be used as a way for us to know how hardy perennial plants will be. These zones are actually based off of average low temperatures. So that way you know what kind of perennials can survive your wintertime lows. It doesn't really give us an accurate picture of when we should be planting out our annual crops. So what we should be looking at instead are frost dates. What frost dates tell us is the average first frost of your year in the fall and also your average last frost in the springtime. Now, this is an average, usually depending on which index you're looking at. It's either taken over a period of 10 years or 20 years. So know that that range can really vary. We are actually just about at our last frost date, and we just had a frost last night. And that's why you want to have an idea of about when your last frost is. And then you also want to, during that time period, both leading up to it and after it, really be watching your temperatures to make sure that if you've planted out some warm crops, they're not going to experience a frost that might kill them or damage them. Now that we've talked about that, let's talk about the benefits of growing seasonally. So really, when we're looking at the gardening calendar of seasons, there's basically the cold season, that's usually during winter for most of us. Then there's the cool season, which is late winter into springtime. The warm season, which is springtime into early summer. The hot season, which is kind of dead in the center of summertime. And then we kind of move back into the warm season, then into the cool season, back into the cold season. So it just keeps on going around in a circle like that. By growing based off of the seasons, we actually get a lot more flexibility because your region is going to be different from any other region. And honestly, even your property and where your garden is positioned is probably going to be different than another person, even just up the road. And that's what we call microclimates, but we'll get into those another day. But the fact of the matter is, if you are growing based off of the seasons and you can understand what gardening season you're in, it's going to become a lot more intuitive to know what and when to plant. So if you have a lot of questions and you're never sure what you should be planting, learning how to garden by the seasons is going to be a big benefit for you. So let's talk about the warm season. And again, if you want to check out the cool season, you can check out this video right up here where I talk more in depth about the cool season gardening. So as we move from the cool season into the warm season, of course, there's going to be times when that weather is just all over the place. That's spring, right? We get crazy storms, we get late snows, we just kind of never know what to expect. But there are a few things that we can really start to see patterns of. And those patterns are going to be increasing the further we move into the warm season. So the first thing to expect during the warm season is that your average high temperatures are going to start to rise a little bit. So whereas during the cool season, we were in the 40s, the 50s, maybe getting into the 60s, now we're going to be much more consistently in like the mid to high 50s, all the way up into the 70s, depending on where you are. So that is going to give us a lot more flexibility with what we can plant. Along with that, also your overnight lows are going to be increasing as well. So you're going to have fewer frost risk nights. Now, there still might be an occasional risk, but really at this point, we're pretty much out of the woods on that, and it's just going to be those occasional nights where it might be frosty. Along with this, your soil temperature is also going to start warming up. But for a lot of our warm crops, we kind of want that soil temperature to get up into the 50s and kind of consistently stay there. And again, that's going to vary a little bit. So raised gardens will always warm faster than in-ground gardens. So if you're unsure kind of where your soil temperatures are sitting, you can get a soil thermometer, and that's going to help you kind of have a better gauge on that. For most gardeners in zones 6 through 8, it's going to be usually in May and June. However, based on your region, that can really vary. For instance, here in the Pacific Northwest, we don't have very hot summers. So our warm season actually kind of starts late May and goes all the way through June and even into parts of July sometimes. So again, learning how to garden by the seasons based off of these signs is going to be a big benefit, because you'll be able to better know, like, all right, it's still pretty much in the warm season. I should still be doing these activities and planting these things. So the warm season is the ideal time to be sowing and planting out the majority of your crops. Certain cool crops are still able to be planted at the beginning of the warm season, and as we're moving from the beginning of the warm season more into the middle and end of it, that's when we're going to be wanting to plant out a lot of our hot crops and really sowing a lot of those hot crops as well. And then as it continues to warm up, we're going to see kind of our cool crops start fading back. Primarily once we start getting up into the 80s consistently, that's when you'll see like your peas aren't doing so great, your lettuce starts bolting. This is a great time to still be able to capitalize on kind of the middle nice ground between the cool season and the warm season before we move into the hot season. So with that in mind, let's talk about what we should be planting. So let's start by talking about transplants. So transplants are seedlings, basically, that have already been started earlier in the year, and then you're going to plant them out as a fully fledged baby plant. This is a great time to plant out your tomatoes, your peppers, your okra, really all of your nightshades. This is the ideal time to be planting them out, but there's a few things you want to watch for. So again, ideally, your overnight lows aren't going to be dipping much below the 50s. Now, we can't always guarantee this, but you want to make sure that for the most part, you're consistently staying in the high 40s, really not getting too much below that on a regular basis. That's where they're going to do their best and have the best kind of growth. So along with tomatoes, we have some other nightshade family plants that are going to be transplanted out, and that's going to be like your peppers, eggplants, things like that. Now, the reason I'm recommending that these are planted out as transplants rather than being direct seeded into the garden is because these are slow growing plants. And if you're especially in zone 6 through 8 or even lower than that, you probably have a shorter window of when you can be growing between those frost dates. So this is another reason why looking at those frost dates and getting familiar with them is really important. So if you have, let's say, a 120-day season, or even 150, 160-day season, which can be pretty common in there, is basically telling you that if you plant an eggplant or a tomato that takes 100 to 120 days to go from seed to producing fruit, you're going to have a very small window of time to be harvesting and enjoying that harvest. So that's why starting them ahead of time, even 30, 60 days, can make a huge difference, and you'll get to harvest a lot faster than you would otherwise. So at this point, yes, you still can plant your tomatoes from seed. However, look for varieties that have a short days to harvest. And basically you'll want to go with ones that are no more than 100 days so that you still have a good window of time to be harvesting from them before your frost comes. Some other crops that you can be planting, both indoors or outdoors at this point, depending on where you're at and what your weather is doing during this warm season, are squash family plants. So your squash family plants are going to include your cucumbers, melons, your gourds, pumpkins, zucchini, all of that. So it's nice to go ahead and give them a jump start as well. They grow really fast though. So unlike our nightshades, if you don't have time to get them started ahead of time, you do have the option to plant them out directly in the garden. And something else that you can do to increase your harvest is going to be starting a few early like this, and then also starting some directly from the garden. And what that's going to do is basically give a different window of time as to when they'll be ready to harvest. So for instance, especially with your zucchini and your cucumbers, they tend to kind of set a really great harvest at the beginning of the season, and then you'll see them start to kind of wane off and not produce as much because they have a little bit shorter life period. So with that, it's great to go ahead and start some, 4-6 weeks ahead of time, and then start some directly in the garden. So as these guys start to reach the end of that really good production time, you can go ahead and remove them and let the other ones grow in so that you'll have a little bit better harvest and a little bit longer extended harvest. And that's actually what we call successional planting, and it is a big benefit. We'll talk more about that as we go out to the garden too. Some other plants that you might want to consider starting ahead of time, even if it's just a couple of weeks to give them a jump start, are your summer herbs. Now with these, again, you can direct sow them in the garden, or you can plant them a little bit early and get a jump start on the season. So these are frost tender herbs, meaning that you shouldn't be planting them out until your frost danger has passed. So this includes your dill, basil, your summer savory, tulsi, lemongrass. All of those kind of herbs are really frost sensitive. So again, giving them a jump start is just going to give you a longer harvest season. And you can also successionally sow these. So this is really a great time for successional planting. So here we are out in the garden, and now we're going to start talking about some of the plants that we can sow directly in our garden beds this time of year. So the first thing that you're going to want to get planted out in the garden is any of your cool crops that you either haven't planted yet, cool crop seedlings that you want to transplant out into the garden, or even seeds that you want to directly sow. You want to get your cool crops in as early in that warm season as possible. This can also be a really good time to sow a second batch of cool crops before it gets too warm for them to germinate. So they really like those cooler soil temperatures in order to best germinate and to really have that ideal growth. So whether you're starting from seeds or seedlings, now is the time. Don't wait, get your cool crops planted out here because they're going to get a much better start than if you wait in that soil temperature and those days start to warm up. They're going to struggle a little bit more. You can check out the video I did about what to plant in March and April for more ideas of what those cool crops are that you can sow directly in the garden. All of those can still be sown now, but a few of them are obviously going to be your hardy herbs. That's going to be like your parsley. I've got a big old batch of parsley over here, cilantro, a lot of your root crops like your parsnips, carrots, radishes, beets. All of those are really good in cool soil. And then also your brassica family plants. So I've got some cauliflower over here, broccoli, your kale, any cabbages, all of those things. And then you're also going to want to get your peas and things like that in the ground as soon as possible because they really do prefer those cool, dark soils to do their best germination. Now, your garlic and onions also can go in the ground at this point. Know that if you're starting from seed on those onions, it's going to take them a little bit longer. So again, get them in the ground as soon as possible. If you're using onion sets, the little baby bulbs, you have a little bit more leeway on that, and you can plant those a little bit later in the warm season, but they're still going to do their best when the soils are a little bit cooler. Now is also the great time to get your potatoes planted. So potatoes can be planted really pretty early in the season, and they're going to start germinating and then really take off once the temperatures warm up. So get them planted as soon as possible. I did a couple of videos both talking about how to plant potatoes in containers, actually in bags like these, and then also talking about the importance of knowing if they're indeterminate or determinate varieties, because it's going to change the way you plant them. So your regular potatoes do really well being planted early in the season. You can plant them pretty much once the ground is workable. So if you still have frost coming, that's okay. You can still go ahead and plant your regular potatoes. But sweet potatoes, you're gonna wanna wait until there's no more frost and until the soils warm up. So they are kind of a tropical crop and they like a really nice long warm season. So you can always start them indoors or start them in big bags like this, keep them in your greenhouse for a while or in a nice sheltered warm spot. That can help give you a jump start. So you can plant sweet potatoes at this point, but really watch the weather and make sure you're keeping them protected. Let's talk a little bit about your greens. Now is still a really good time to be planting out greens. So with both leafy greens and lettuces, most of them prefer a cooler season and will germinate better in cooler soils and won't bolt as quickly as they will in the heat. However, as we start moving from the cooler end of the warm season into the warmer, getting to the hot season, we might want to think about what type of greens we are planting and go for ones that can handle the heat a little bit better. Swiss chard is a great example. It does very well in the heat. You can also do long day spinach, which is going to not bolt as quickly. It can handle those longer, warmer days. Same thing with strawberry spinach. Kale is another one that generally doesn't bolt as quickly. So look for those greens that are a little bit more bolt resistant, or sow your butterhead lettuces and things like that in areas where they get a little bit more shade. Maybe they get some nice morning sun and then they have some shade from that heat of the day in the afternoon when the most intense sun is out. All right, let's talk about corn. So corn is also ideally planted during this time, and like many of those other warm crops, it prefers warm soils. So this is one that you're going to want to get planted once the soil kind of warms up a little bit. However, you can choose to go ahead and start your corn inside in trays and then transplant it out. You just want to be a little bit careful so you're not disturbing or jostling the roots a little bit. So try to make it as seamless as possible when you're transplanting it out. But it's a great time to go ahead and get your corn started. And depending where you are, that can mean you're either planting it directly in the garden or you're planting it inside and giving it a little jump start until your soil temperatures warm up to about the 50-degree range. And finally, it's time to sow one of my favorite crops, which are beans. So beans really do best when they're direct sown into the garden. Yes, you can start them early and transplant them, but they tend to do best when their roots aren't disturbed. So I just save myself the time and plant them directly in the garden once the temperatures warm up. So these are ones that are frost sensitive, so you're going to want to make sure that you're out of that frost risk and you have that warmer soil. Again, ideally soil temperatures 50 and above, and kind of keeping those overnight lows no lower than 50 is going to be the best time to sow your beans. This includes both climbing beans or pole beans as well as bush beans, and that includes both green beans that you eat fresh, so snap beans, things like that, and then also your drying beans. Similar to tomatoes or potatoes, beans kind of have different habits. So pole beans are usually more like an indeterminate tomato where they're going to continue growing and growing and growing, and they're going to produce that harvest for much longer throughout the season, whereas bush beans are going to kind of set one heavy harvest and then you're going to harvest that and the plant's going to pretty much be done after that. So with those, I really like to also successionally plant them. So when I'm going through the garden, I'm not just planting all of my beans at once. Instead, I plant a couple of rows of them, and then I come back a week, 2 weeks later, and I plant another few rows. Then a few weeks later after that, I plant another couple rows. So again, right now during the warm season is a great time to start doing that successional sowing. Really for your beans, you can start that once your frost risk is over, and really be sowing those every week to 2 weeks, all the way up through June into early July as well. You'll get a much longer harvest that way. And finally, you might want to consider some cover crops for summertime. If you have some bed space that you aren't planting in, cover crops are a great way to go. Now, traditionally with a lot of cover crops, we think about using them during the off season, throughout fall and winter, but there are a lot of cover crops that do very well in the summertime. And what they're going to do is help provide for your soil. So this is great in areas where you aren't planting. If you have some empty bed space that you're not going to plant this year, go ahead and throw some cover crops in there. Or I also like to kind of rotate out my beds. So for instance, where my garlic is planted, Once I harvest it in July, I plant a cover crop and let that cover crop grow until fall, and then I use those beds for my fall crops. I talk more about that in the video about how I do my successional planting and my garden rotations if you want more info on that. But let's talk about some really good summer cover crops. Wheat is one of them. So there are many varieties of wheat. There's actually, wheats that grow really well in the winter and in the cooler season. And then there's ones that do a little bit better in the heat. Oats are a really fun one to grow. Not only do oats provide, again, a really great cover crop, but you can also harvest from them. I love harvesting the milky oats and making a milky oat tincture. It's really nutritive and very, very calming. It's a really good, like non-drowsy, calming tincture to make. It also works really good for livestock forage. We used to especially harvest ours to feed our rabbits. They love the oat hay. So lots of animals can eat oat hay. Super easy to grow. They're pretty much, you just sow them and forget them. And then finally, buckwheat. So I just ordered another big bag of buckwheat because I can't go a year without growing my buckwheat. It is one of my favorite cover crops for summer. And why I love it is because it has these beautiful flowers on it. It grows so fast. It's so heat tolerant. It doesn't take a lot of water. And those flowers attract so many pollinators, so many beneficial insects. It is definitely one of my must-have cover crops for summertime. So I will for sure be planting buckwheat again. Plus, if you want, you can make yourself some buckwheat pancakes, right? So that's always a fun bonus as well. All right, so hopefully after watching this, you're feeling a little bit more confident about what you can be planting and you're ready to get out into that garden. So if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up or share it with a friend. And then also hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. I post about twice a week. At the beginning of the week, we do a tutorial like this one. And then at the end of the week, we share our vlog so you can get a behind the scenes look of everything that we're doing, everything that we're building. And there's a lot of great tips shared in that as well. So thanks for tuning in. Happy planting.